so 2 goals for both, same 2 goals as last week. You guys remember what they were? Anyone? Faith will be strengthened. And more comfortable speaking about your faith. That's good. Very back row and used to be front row. Okay? All right, good. Yeah, those 2 things. Okay, those are 2 goals for today. All right? All right. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Do you see how your mind automatically starts figuring it out? I didn't have to tell you to start figuring it out. You didn't even have to. You just saw that and go, and you figured it out. It kind of relates to what I just preached on in the first hour. Our mind is automatically making sense of things all the time. So I tie it in. Okay, so every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now, who said that? Anybody know who first said that? You did. No, who? Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was the first one to say that. Okay? Isaac Newton, I got his birth and death dates there. And Isaac Newton, you've heard of Isaac Newton. He's the guy, the apple falls and falls, hit him on the head. And he's like, oh, gravity. You've heard that story, right? I hate to break it to you, that story might be completely untrue. But at any rate, sorry to shatter your reality. But he did actually write a lot about physics. And in fact, he wrote a book in Latin. In Latin, it's called the Principia. And basically, it's like the principles for how everything works. Like, can you imagine writing that book? Seriously. But he wrote that book. But do you know, most people don't realize he wrote more about the Bible than he did about physics and math. Here's what else he said. Great quote. Probably my favorite quote from Isaac Newton. Atheism is so senseless and odious to mankind that it never had many professors. Now, a professor, we hear the word professor, we think college teacher? No. One who professes it, one who says they're an atheist. And he's correct. In all of human history, there have not been very many atheists. Most people groups throughout all history worship something. I mean, they worship the sun, the moon, the tree, the rocks. I don't know. Nobody rewind 1,000 years. Are you an atheist? What? What's that? Okay, there hasn't been very many atheists in human history. Well, in fact, these are all historical scientists who believed in God. You might recognize, oh boy, wow. It did not look like that on my computer. Okay. Wow. Okay, let me just clarify that. You ever heard the name Copernicus? Or Galileo, or Kepler? They still are naming like satellites and telescopes after these guys today, okay? And Louis Pasteur, if you drink pasteurized milk, Louis did that, okay? Robert Boyle, father of chemistry. Anyway, all these people were, I don't know if they were necessarily Christians, but they believed in God. They were scientists who believed in God. In fact, most scientists used to. Okay. Anybody know who that is? Yeah, Darwin. You can't help but guess, though. There's your machinery, right? It's working. It's like, all right. Charles Darwin. Okay, Charles Darwin wrote a book in 1859, and these are drawings from his journals. Actually, he went to these islands called the Galapagos Islands, and he saw finches there with different shaped beaks. Okay, and That's his act. He didn't draw that. He hired a drawer, artist, all right, to do it. And so different shaped beaks for the birds. And he's like, that's interesting. These birds on these islands, some of them get long beaks, some short beaks. And he got thinking about it. There's that machinery going. All right, his machinery started going. He's like, So a bird with one shaped beak could have a baby bird with a different shaped beak. Whoa. And then he started extrapolating. He's like, maybe through lots of generations, it wouldn't even be a bird anymore. Maybe it would be a mouse or something. Okay? If the beaks can change, I guess maybe the whole thing can change. And so these are called Darwin's finches, and he wrote a book called On the Origin of Species. Okay? On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. This is the cover page. If you read the small print there, I don't know if you can, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. That's the subtitle. These days, that subtitle wouldn't gain much traction, so I'm sure people don't mention it very much. But that's Darwin's book, all right? Evolution. I was being interviewed this past week on a podcast, and they asked me, well, what do Christians think about evolution? Is evolution kind of a bad word? And I think this is kind of important to understand, even if some of you might think my opening statement is a little controversial. Evolution, the term evolution, isn't really a problem unless you're saying that all the species originated by evolution. You see the different? Have you guys heard of like antibiotic resistance, right? We don't want to take antibiotics because the bacteria can adapt, like the stronger bacteria. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Well, we can say, hey, they can adapt and become stronger bacteria, okay? The problem where evolution and where Darwin goes is like, well, yeah, one day those bacteria will turn into a person. And we're like, whoa, that's a problem, okay? That type of evolution is definitely a problem in terms of Christianity. It's anti-Christian, okay? But antibiotic resistance is not anti-Christian. Okay, it's the origin of the species part that's the real problem here. And I would say that origin of the species is not only a problem for Christianity, it's a problem because of the mathematics and the science involved. Darwin, when he came up with his theory, and like I said, the book was published in 1859. He had microscopes, but they weren't very good ones. Okay? So to Darwin, a cell, for example, raise your hand if you know what a cell is. Okay. I'm not going to ask you to define it. I just wanted to make sure you know your audience, I know, the first row here, they all know what cells are. Cells, we have like 30 to 40 trillion cells in our bodies, but to Darwin, a cell was a glob of gray goo, and he knew there was something in there like a nucleus, and that's it. Okay? That was all he knew. Well, today, we can look at and answer. We know exactly why antibiotic resistance can happen very easily. But a bacteria, through generations and generations, a billion generations, is not going to turn into a non-bacteria. Okay, we can know how that is scientifically in a way Darwin never could. And I'd like to explain that to you today. So first, there's going to be 2 or 3 reasons. Number 1, the required mutations are statistically unreasonable. And I'll provide the evidence why that is. Okay. What do we mean by a mutation? A bird, a finch, has a certain beak shape. And maybe when they're born, the kid birds, the baby birds, they have different shaped beaks. And maybe some of the kids that are born, some of the babies that are born, they're born with like shorter beaks, but those beaks are better at cracking dry weather seeds because the dry weather seeds are thicker. And so then, after several generations of drought, all the birds end up having the thick, short, stubby beaks because they're better. They survive better. The other ones with the thin, long beaks just starve. They can't open the seeds as well. Okay? And so pretty soon, after a while, the mutations, right, the genetic variations in the child, just like when you have a child, some are short, some are tall, some are, whatever. Same thing, the genetic variations, the mutations, change the offspring. But the required mutations to change a bird into a mouse, over billions of years, go ahead and give them billions of years, even though it's not billions of years. It's statistically unreasonable. And here's how we know. Anybody know what, I'm going to talk about a disease real quick. Anybody know what disease I might be, going to talk about? What? Malaria. Yeah, malaria. Okay. Yes. Okay. A mosquito carrying the malaria is caused by a parasite called P. falciparum. We'll just call it the malaria parasite. Okay. And it goes in and attacks the blood. And in the mid-1900s, 1950s or something like that, chloroquine. Chloroquine was the drug of choice to treat malaria. It would kill, if you're infected with malaria, you could use chloroquine and it would help. The malaria parasites just didn't like it. But by the 1980s, chloroquine wasn't very effective anymore. What happened? Well, the malaria parasites became resistant to it. Okay? Textbooks still use malaria as a great example of evolution, okay, of what evolution can do. And you know what? Malaria is a great example of what evolution can do. It can change a malaria parasite and make it into a malaria parasite that is not affected by chloroquine anymore. But you know what malaria is also good for? It's a good example of what evolution cannot do. So this is a great, I don't like malaria, don't get me wrong. I just like, this example is a really good example of what evolution can and cannot do. So the question is, scientifically, how? How do some of these become resistant? Darwin, no clue. Because he didn't even know what DNA was. DNA wasn't even discovered until almost 100 years later. But when there's a mutation in the DNA that tells the cells what proteins to build, that's how you know. So we know exactly why malaria can adapt to chloroquine. All right, let's picture a protein built out of 424 Legos. All right, there's a certain protein in the malaria parasite built out of 424 amino acids. We're just going to call them Legos. All right, so picture 424 proteins long, 424 Legos long. That's one protein. Okay. If block number 76 and block number 220 were substituted out, that's a genetic mutation, and a new parasite was born with a different block in position 76 and 220. It's got to be 76 and 220. 221, chloroquine will get it. Position 75, chloroquine will kill it. But if it's those two, that malaria parasite will survive chloroquine. And it'll live to produce parasite babies that will survive chloroquine. Okay? Well, what are the chances of this mutation happening? We can study. We know the chances because in the 1950s is when chloroquine was started, and by the 1980s, chloroquine was ineffective. So it took, let's say it took 30 years. How many people are infected with malaria per year? A couple years ago it was 263 million, but they've got records. Add up how many people, each person on average, how many parasites, malaria parasites are in there. You know there's like 1 trillion On average, yeah, okay. So trillion parasites per person, a couple 100 million people a year. How many years did it take for resistance to happen? 30-ish. Add up, you can do the calculations yourself. I'll spare you the pain. But about 1 in 10 to the 20th. So in other words, 10 to the 20, that's a big number. Let me explain what that number is. It's a 1 with 20 zeros after it. So if you have that many parasites, one of them will be immune. And once one of them are immune, they can have immune babies, and pretty soon it spreads. That's terrible odds. The chances of winning the lottery, like the big lottery, I should have looked this up. You guys can fact check me. Okay, but it's like 1 in maybe 10 to the 6 or 7 or 8. 6 or 7 or 8 0, that, And then we were like, that's terrible odds. I'm never going to win the lottery, right? How in the world? Well, these guys just got a lot of tickets. They got like 1 trillion parasites in each person infected times 2. So they can overcome these terrible odds because they have a huge population. So it took them 30 years. Now, why is this important? Well, we know exactly how they can become immune. We know exactly what happens. It's kind of cool. All right. Well, then we can say, okay, how many mutations are needed to do that? And what are the odds? We can calculate them and go, is it reasonable? It's not even reasonable for me to win the lottery. So let's just picture for a minute. One mutation, let's just say, all right, it's twice as good as the malaria mutation. Now remember, the malaria mutation, it did not change into a different species, okay? All it did is it actually broke its stomach. It broke it. It makes it a worse parasite. The stomach gets, it doesn't have a stomach. I'm just trying to talk. But it's like the mutation that helps it survive, it doesn't even make it better. It's a broken digestive system, so it can't digest the drug. And that makes it resistant. Take away the drug, and that type dies out because it's worse, and they all revert back to normal. Okay, so this isn't even evolution helping it out in a real sense. It's only helpful if there's chloroquine. It's kind of like what evolution is really good at. If suddenly your life depended on you driving as fast as possible. You have to drive as fast as possible. Your car as fast as possible. What do? Well, rip out the passenger seat, take the doors off, take out everything. Just get rid of everything that isn't absolutely essential for you driving as fast as possible. Why? Because your life depends on going fast. Do you make your car better? No, it's only better in that condition. Do you understand what's going on? So that's what evolution does, and we know it's doing that. We know position 76 and 220, this is what it does. All right? Evolution is actually making things worse, usually. Okay, well, what are the odds of a mutation twice as good as the malaria mutation? We got to get something good here because we got to really change this little parasite into a human here. So let's think about bacteria. There's lots of bacteria formed on Earth every single year, 10 to the 30th. That's how many bacteria are formed every year. That's 1 with 30 zeros. I know, I'm going to go wash my hands right now. Okay, so there's a whole lot of bacteria formed on Earth every year. Now, let's just say that bacteria have been doing this for 10 billion years. Evolutionists don't even think 10 billion, that's too high. But we're just giving them lots of years. All right, we've got that many bacteria on Earth, and let's just go for 10 billion, even though it's more like 5, 6, 7,000, 8,000. Okay, but we'll just say, we'll give you your 10 billion, Mr. Evolutionist, okay? The odds are slightly against even one such mutation ever occurring in bacteria over 10 billion years. The odds are against even one double malaria mutation happening. It's just math. It's not bias. It's just you add up. There's just not enough zeros to do that. What about fish or mammals with much smaller populations? I'm sorry, but there are not 10 to the 30th fish every year. That's too much, okay? The mutations needed to do this, we wouldn't have to just have one bacteria succeed in 10 billion years. We'd have to have millions of all kinds of organisms succeed in 10 billion years to do that. And so I can conclude, yeah, not only does the origin of the species contradict Genesis, it contradicts this thing called math and this other thing called science. It is not scientifically or mathematically reasonable for species to do that. It's very reasonable for malaria to do it. But why? Because the math and the science, it's mathematically and scientifically reasonable for this and not for that. You guys following me? Is that, hopefully it's not too heavy. All right. So, why the origin of species by evolution is not scientifically or mathematically reasonable? Because the required mutations are statistically unreasonable. But there's more. Life forming from non-life has never been observed so far. Right? So far, we are assuming. Do you know what this assumes? That little word called start. It assumes that formed somehow, right? It turns out that's a big assumption. Scientists have been trying for a long time to, in their labs, make something not alive become alive. And they've never succeeded in that. Science is supposed to be based on observation. So yeah, that's really bad. So that's the second reason. How did the very first things, form in the first place? Okay. Oh yeah. So, this guy, Dean Kenyon, in 1969, he published a book called Biochemical Predestination. He was not a theologian, though. He was a scientist, atheist scientist, and he published this book. It was a textbook for biochemical predestination. And what that means is basically how life can arise from non-life. He published this book in 1969. In class one day, a student asked him, so how could the very first protein form without specific genetic instructions? Remember what those instructions are included on? DNA? DNA has all the instructions. So student asked him, how is it possible to assemble a protein, all those blocks in the right order without the instructions? I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to build Legos without the instructions. It's bad. Or put something together from IKEA without the instructions. I kind of like IKEA instructions. There's only pictures. I don't have to read anything. It's kind of nice. But no instructions? It's like, maybe Kevin could do it. Me? Not so much. Okay? So, he published this book in 1969. Do you know what happened? 1976, Kenyon rejected his own theory. He literally wrote the book. And now he works for the Discovery Institute, and he is a professor too, and he works on explaining why there is a God. You see, the required mutations are statistically unreasonable, but also life forming from non-life just doesn't work. Just ask Dean Kenyon. And third, many biological structures are what's called irreducibly complex. Okay, what does that mean? What is irreducible complexity? This is the harder one to explain, but you guys will get it. Irreducible complexity just means that a structure cannot be built by small successive steps. What is evolution? According to Darwin, how does a bird change into something else? Okay, how does it do that? Small successive steps. No biologist says, oh yeah, wow, these birds, they had a baby, they crack open the egg, whoa, a hamster. Right? Nobody does that. It's small success. Oh, the beak changed. Oh wow, the beak changed again. Oh wow, the claw changed a little bit. Over and over and over and over and over again until it becomes something. So it's got to be small successive steps. The problem is some of the structures in nature are not just complex. They're irreducibly complex. What that means is you can't build them one at a time. So, for example, only if the beak helps the bird eat better does that bird survive and have bird babies, right? If the beak doesn't let the bird eat, no bird babies, right? So it has to be a little step that makes the bird better in its environment. And then it can keep taking the steps. Okay. A mousetrap is not alive, okay? But it's an example of something that could never be built by evolution. Because if you have a mousetrap that's half made, it doesn't do anything, right? So picture a block of wood. And then a block of wood has block of wood babies with a spring on it. How does that help? It doesn't help. So that block of wood with the spring just doesn't have block of wood babies. Right? Or picture, without the hammer to hold it in place. And it just, so the mousetrap stays closed and it'll starve and won't have little mousetrap babies. Right? So the mousetrap, we say that is irreducibly complex because that's an example of something that can't be built in successive, simple steps. Make sense? Do you think there's anything in biology like that? Here's what Darwin said in his book, in chapter 6, page 189. I mean, it kind of depends on which edition you have, but it's in chapter 6. He said this: if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I can find no such cases. Yeah, he couldn't find any such cases because he couldn't look the way we can at how things are built with DNA and all the proteins and stuff. So that's what he said. All we got to do is just find some structures that can't be built. And it turns out there's tons of them. Here's a cool one. The flagella motor in bacteria. There's bacteria, and there's a bacteria with a flagella. Flagella is like the little tail, and it goes, and then it can move. You could imagine, with a tail, how you could travel and get food easier. I think. Okay. It's kind of like a boat without a motor and a boat with a motor. If you're on the motorboat, you're going to get more fish, and then you'll survive for the next fishing competition. Okay? Well, that looks like a simple change, doesn't it? It turns out that there's a motor that turns the flagella and lets it work, and that motor has 42 separate parts, each coded by a different section of the genes. And so basically, you would need not just a stepwise, you'd have to do 42 steps at once. Do you remember how hard it was for that one bacteria, or for the one malaria thing to happen? Imagine getting 42 of those to happen in exactly, and the instructions to build them in the right order. Yeah. So picture having, what evolution, and evolutionists can't really explain this very well. What about a motor that's 80% complete? That's not good. Can you imagine rowing your boat? You got to row your boat with a motor, 80% of a motor. You know what you do with that motor? You toss it in the lake so you can row. It's heavy. It weighs down your boat. So there's no way to build this, and there's a whole lot of examples. Blood clotting. When you cut yourself, blood doesn't just keep going out forever. That's a good thing. Because it clots. Well, there's over 20 different proteins, 20 different things that have to all be present for it to work. So evolution can't just, hey, you got 19. No, you're going to bleed a lot. So it's something you can't build it by evolution. You got to do 20 steps at once there. Eyesight. Now, this is really kind of cool. It's like, we don't just go, wow, the eye is so complex. Yeah. But do you know an eye is worthless without simultaneously having brain systems to interpret the visual signals? Oh, Do you see how it doesn't make sense? Like, oh yeah, an eye could evolve, and then later a brain to interpret it will evolve. No, there's no reason for the eye would not be advantageous to a creature without the brain to interpret it, without the section of the brain to interpret it. They both have to be developed, and both are super complex. Both of them are irreducibly complex at the same time, and they both work together. So there's a lot of stuff like that. It's just not very reasonable. So those are 3 reasons why origin of the species, by evolution, is not scientifically or mathematically reasonable. Okay? So when somebody asks me, what do you think about evolution? I always ask them, well, what do you mean by evolution? Do you mean like how bacteria can develop resistance to, Dawn dish soap? Great. Yeah, I'm all about that. That's fine. That's mathematically and scientifically reasonable. Or are you talking about how that bacteria one day, 10 billion years later, will, have descendants who are, a dog? So, not so much. Okay? Why? Because it's not scientifically and mathematically reasonable. So hopefully when you think about evolution and you think about, I would recommend, as we continue to go through life, as you interact with people, instead of just saying, oh, evolution is a bunch of hogwash. Try to find out, what do you mean by evolution, right? Do you mean the antibiotics soap stuff? Or do you mean like your great-great-great-great-great-great-granddad was an amoeba? Okay, because there's 2 different things, right? And that'd be helpful. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Do mutations become permanent? And when?
If they're genetic mutations, they can be passed down. Yeah. So,
In the sense that they would never go back?
well, not necessarily, but usually no. I mean, I don't know about never and ever, but I think it's the genetic mutations that are passed down. And then I'm comfortable saying I think those would be permanent. Yeah. Any other questions? I never asked questions either. When I was in class, I would not raise my hand at all. So I understand. I know how you feel. Plus, if the teacher already explained everything perfectly, you don't need it. No.
It's not just the gaps getting from amoeba to human, now that there are gaps even explaining like Homo sapien.
Oh yeah, the gaps. Oh yeah, there's huge gaps. So they don't even have a good chain. Like my little picture, lots of gaps in there, lots of missing links. You've heard of the missing link? Yeah, most of them are missing. Yeah, they're just about all missing. That's a kind of a funny thing, like the missing link. Oh, lots of them. The missing links is more accurate. Yeah, lots of missing. Yes.
Are there any theologists that struggle with aspects of science conflicting with their understanding?
Are there scientists that struggle with it?
Theologists that struggle with matters in the reverse way. So if you're having a conversation with somebody who looks at things both scientifically,
Oh yeah.
are there any theology
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
that study this, say you go to the art exhibit and they go, this is just real hard for us to put together?
Sure. And I think there probably are, and this is a lot of, the statistics aren't great. Even if you're not a theology person, the statistics, some, students, they go to college, they grow up and they know the truth, and then they go to college and you get inundated with these statements of evolution that, okay, I guess this is the way it is. And they don't realize that most of your atheists, they don't have good reasons for even believing what they believe. If you're a professor and you really know your stuff, I guess you might be able to debate with me decently. But just on college, on Grand Valley's campus, for example, I'm talking to an atheist student. Oh, you believe in evolution? Okay, and I said, can you give me an example of where new species have arisen? And all they can do is repeat what their professor said one day in some vague term. So most people are repeating one-liners. They're repeating things. But a theology person, if they've only encountered that and they're not equipped to deal with it, They might be going off of misinformation. I mean, you look at the infographic, well, it looks convincing. I mean, it doesn't look convincing, but to some people it might. And if they don't know better, and so that's why I think it's really important in this day and age, if we have the arguments, yes, origin of species is not biblical. Yes, I can show you in Genesis, but if you need more than Genesis, it's not scientific either. And most people don't know that. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but yeah. Any others? Yeah, Sean.
If you did have a genetic mutation in humans, don't that become pairs anyway?
You mean I don't know if they always come in pairs. Like you can have one, I'm not sure. Yeah. Unfortunately, I am not, fortunately, I'm specifically not a biology person. Chemistry and physics mostly. I know, yeah.
So if this is true, why do we hear so much about it?
Why do you hear so much about it? Well, yeah, that's really good. If you were in the 1950s, before you could look at, and you see mutations happening, Darwin sounded pretty convincing in the 1860s and 1870s in the lack of this evidence, right? This is 20 years, 20, 30 years. The last 20, 30 years is all, we haven't been able to look at that very long. And so in the 50s, your theology person in the 50s and 60s, I think it'd be a lot more difficult. This is, and even then, if there is some science that appears to contradict, now we've got some history. We go, this appears to contradict for a few decades. And then the science catches up. So I'm okay if I come across some science and I'm like, and I can't explain it, I'm like, because the preponderance of evidence tells me this, I'm okay with not being able to explain a couple things over here. I think in maybe 20 years I'll be able to,
My struggle is that we have all this information.
Yes.
And you still have people
And then,
standing
yes.
there going, oh, isn't that incredible? We can see this thing, and it doesn't make any sense.
Well, you have
Brilliant scientists, and they can't even connect the dots.
But here's what's going on. You can check this out at Pew Research, P-E-W, pewresearch.org. They've been taking surveys of scientists. And do you know, right now, scientists who are 60 and over are much more likely to be atheists than scientists who are 35. What does that tell you? The ones who are indoctrinated, older, they're set in their ways. I don't know if you've ever been set in your ways on something, but we're not exactly always rational, logical people. It's kind of, again, the sermon I preached this morning. If we want to think, if we want to do something, we will pretty much, if we don't want there to be a God, we will not. But the younger scientists, I'm not saying it's a majority yet, but they are more likely to not be atheists than the older ones.
Well, the reason I ask
Yeah.
is because I find that people don't want to know.
And they don't want to know. Yeah.
They want to do what they want to do, and evolution gives them the out to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenge is, how do you
Yes.
communicate
Yes.
or listen well enough
Yep.
to change their awareness?
Right. And sometimes, by developing that personal relationship where they know who you are. So many of my students, you're a Christian and you're a science teacher. How's that work? And so, yeah. But, yeah, people are biased. And
I think we need to remember that Satan is the one who is blinding all of his minds as well. And the more we are blinded to truth, the more we're going to believe on things that, it doesn't make any sense if you were to actually think about it, right?
yeah.
I think we forget that he is very powerful in how he blinds us and how he makes us look into different things or
Right.
Or
Right.
believe things
Right.
that if we were to sit down and start, reading, or like you explain this to us and it's just like it makes sense.
Sure.
But, for some people who don't have that,
Right.
doesn't have the truth, who doesn't have the spirit, and even the ones who do, it's always you
yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have a choice to make, and there's spiritual battles here. That's true. All right, so far, now notice I want you to just be very clear about what I've talked about so far today, right? Because I want to be intellectually fair to these atheist people. We don't want to just say, evolution doesn't work, therefore, God. Huh? Like, why are they supposed to be convinced by that? That fits back with what we did last week. So in case you weren't here, remember, DNA contains encoded information. And information always comes from a mind. So I never just tell people, well, evolution doesn't work, therefore God. I say, and there's information in DNA, and information comes from a mind. So that points us, that's positive evidence instead of negative evidence, right? It points us to that there is a mind responsible. And then also the universe is fine-tuned. Again, talked about it last week. If you weren't here last week, you can watch it still. It's online, I think. But the universe is fine-tuned, right? And fine-tuning implies like, whoa, this is rigged. We're in a rigged universe. Okay, so not only does the science theories like evolution fail at dismissing God, there's scientific evidence in the positive direction that point to him. See the difference? It's one thing to say, hey, you got a bad explanation. And then, hey, there's also evidence for his existence. The last piece of evidence I'd like to mention is the fact that the universe had a beginning. Scientists call it the Big Bang. Didn't get to mention this last week. Most people don't realize the Big Bang was thought of in the 1920s. Okay. Do you know what scientists thought of it? Scientists came and said, he was actually a Catholic physicist that formulated the Big Bang Theory. And do you know what the scientific community said to him? It's ridiculous. By you saying that there was a Big Bang, you're implying a creator. And so the whole scientific community said, forget it. Because it's too religious. That's kind of weird. We usually think of it the other way, like, oh, well, scientists are... Yeah, they hijacked the Big Bang. In fact, the term Big Bang was coined in the 1940s by an atheist making fun of the theory. You believe everything just had a Big Bang? It was not even a... the guy who invented the idea did not call it, I think I'm going to call it the Big Bang. No, it's sort of like this, really? A Big Bang? And that's the name that stuck. So the Big Bang before this, like the atheists in the 1800s, preferred what's called the steady state model, an eternal universe. It's always been there. Because if it had a beginning, now we need to explain the beginning. Right? But if it's eternal, it's good. Nothing to explain. So Einstein himself did not subscribe to the Big Bang Theory at first until he was shown evidence that the universe is expanding. There's this stuff called background radiation. Anyway, now there is no scientist that would say, no, there never was a beginning. Now all scientists are like, yep, the universe had a beginning. Think about that. That's a huge shift. We all grew up in a time period where like, oh yeah, that's normal. Yeah, Big Bang, yeah, it had a beginning. Nobody argues that now, but rewind 100 years? That's like the hot argument. Look, there's evidence that it had a beginning. And the scientists are like, no. Give them 20 years, they're like, oh no, it had a beginning. Okay? And so the Big Bang then they had to atheize it, because it's undeniable scientific. I don't think that's a word, atheize. Anyway, it's undeniable scientifically. And so now we have to, okay. But think about it. How did the Big Bang start? I mean, God spoke, and it probably was a bang. I don't know. I could imagine it being a bang. But the point is, like really? A whole bunch of nothing without God exploded, and that's how we got everything? I don't know. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So they say, well, some gases exploded. And where did those come from? But see, they have a real problem. And so I would say, hey, the fact that the universe had a beginning is a really good evidence, actually, for God. And the propaganda is that it's been, it's kind of been hijacked by the atheist scientists. But it was not that way from the beginning, to borrow a phrase. Okay. And that's, I think, all I've got for you guys today. Yep. Okay. Guys were good students. Any other questions or thoughts or anything? Yeah.
So you talked about the different ways the theories of it have changed in the evolution theory. We hear people say statements like the science is settled on certain things, and is that actually contrary to the scientific method to even make that kind of statement or assumption?
Yeah, it really is. Because even the atomic theory, all matter is made of atoms, It's not settled. I mean, the theory is constantly being modified. Subatomic particles are constantly getting added as more is able. So yeah, science is settled. Science is ongoing. It's an investigation. And the case is not done. Yeah, that's a real good point. Yeah. That, by the way, is why you're never supposed to trust atoms. Because they make up everything. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't. All right. Any other? Yeah.
How would you explain to us how if a Christian says they're a Christian and they believe that God used evolution, even though you look at Genesis and it's clear to me that I'm biased to the truth.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah. Why would they want that? Why do they insist on that? Because for saying that, God used evolution, what do they mean? Do they mean random mutation and natural selection? Those were Darwin's words. So God used random mutation, or because the random mutations are way too statistically impossible, God did it. And then you're like, why even? So that would be my first question would be like, so why so much can be settled with a question. Oh, okay, well, why do you think that happened? And see where they're coming from. That's what I would do, and I don't know I'd never really, there's not too many people that I've talked to that have had that. So I would always ask good questions, just simply to say, oh, what evidence leads you to believe that God did it this way? Is it all the missing links, or, I'm sorry. But,
That goes to the younger, older as well.
what's that?
The younger,
Oh, yeah.
older. So
Yes.
usually those people are in the older category.
Right.
And then, because I have that trouble with it, it doesn't matter, just salvation, but at the same time, it's truth.
Right.
So I have to count with that.
Right. Yes. The old Earth, you could talk about Mount St. Helens. Remember that erupted, was that in the 80s? 1980? Okay. So there were some researchers in the 90s that took rocks formed from that and sent them off to dating labs, and they came back like a couple million years old. So there is some problems with some of the dating, and again, let's picture you had an hourglass, and sand is flowing, all right? And you walk into the room, and some sand is remaining, and some sand has fallen down, okay? And you have to guess how long that's been going. All you can do is compare how much sand is there and how much sand is there, and you have to assume no sand has been added or taken away, and it was never on its side. It's always been here, right? You have to assume a whole lot, and then you could do your calculations. So whenever somebody dates a rock or something like that, these are the assumptions they're going off of. And then they come out with sorry, I was not prepared to talk about that, but that's what I would talk about with the old people. I mean, the old Earth people. Old Earth. Old Earth. Yeah. Edit that out. Okay. Anything else? I guess we're about out of time. Oh, okay. Yes, Deb.
Being out of high school just a few years myself, what is the state of teaching of evolution in public schools right now?
Yeah, it's still taught. malaria, for example, is a great thing. It's taught in the books, but not the shortcomings. Yeah. So it's a state standard in the state of Michigan. You have to teach it. I never did. But, yeah. That's the state. That's the state of the state right now. Yep. And, a word to us all, you guys who are young, you got to be thinkers. I mean, I'd really, you don't spend some time relaxing, but don't spend too much of your time just playing, entertaining yourselves and playing video games. I mean, really challenge yourselves intellectually so that you can be like Paul in the Areopagus, right? You want to be able to argue and defend the faith. So, all right, thanks, guys. And I guess with that, I'll just pray real quick and we'll call it a day. Lord God.